Like all nations, Kenya has been founded on the efforts of many people, institutions, organizations, corporations and professions. Public transport is one of the most crucial determinants of any nation's development. In Kenya, the company that has been almost synonymous with public road passenger transport is Kenya Bus Services Limited, fondly referred to as KBS, the oldest and longest-serving bus operators. Kenya Bus Service is no longer on the roads, having stopped its operations in May 2005 due to unfair and wasteful competition from the matatu industry and an uncaring public transport regulatory system both at the central government level and at the Nairobi City Council. An indication of the important role Kenya Bus Service played in public road passenger transport is to be seen in the fact that at the time of its collapse, the company had invested more than 2.5 billion Kenya shillings. It was operating more than 400 buses, providing direct employment for more than 3,400 people and carrying more than 150 million passengers a year. That is the more than 70 years legacy Kenya Bus Services Limited left behind. A legacy that included a famous brand name full of nostalgia that prompted a new venture, Kenya Bus Services Management Limited, to register in June 2006 and take over from where Kenya Bus Services Limited had left off. To fight off competition and retain its market share, Kenya Bus rebranded its fleet in 3 different colors: normal green and yellow colors, red arrow and bluebird. Its drivers and conductors were outfitted in new uniforms. But nothing really worked, for the company would not be granted approval to expand its routes or adjust its fares to meet the increasing running costs. The government would make matters more difficult for Kenya Bus Services when in 1989, through the City Council, it ended the public transport monopoly that the company had enjoyed in Nairobi for close to 55 years. That forced the company to again withdraw its services from some of its suburban routes, where competition from matatus had grown considerably. It was an unsustainable situation. In early 1990, United Transport Overseas Services, the owners of Kenya Bus Services, decided they had had enough. They started looking for a buyer. In November the following year, they were able to sell their 75% shares in the company to Stagecoach Holdings Limited, an international transport company based in Perth, Scotland, that operated buses, trains, trams, express coaches and ferries in the United Kingdom, Western Europe, North America and Malawi in Africa. In that deal, Stagecoach, whose group managing director was Anne Gloag and her brother Brian Suter as executive chairman, also ended up as owners of Kenya Bus Services Mombasa Limited. After the purchase, Stagecoach renamed the company Stagecoach Kenya Bus Limited and rebranded its fleet accordingly. This sparked protest strikes by staff, led by the powerful Transport and Allied Workers Union General Secretary Julius Mallee, who feared that staff would lose their service pay. The new owners would later take over an extra 20% of shares from Nairobi City Council through a rights issue, thus ending up with 95% stake in the company, with the remaining 5% being held by the City Council. Despite this continued share in the company, the City Council did not renew the monopoly franchise that Kenya Bus Services had enjoyed till 1989. This showed that the government was keen to pull Kenya Bus out in favour of its own Nyayo Bus. Stagecoach took to its new challenges with gusto. To keep a good share of the transport market that now served nearly 1.5 million residents of the city, the new semi-automatic ERF buses would replace the old Leland and Guy Victory buses that had been operated by Kenya Bus Services. Stagecoach ordered 200 ERF buses, including 20 second-hand buses from South Africa, and diverted to Kenya 20 Dennis Dragon double-decker buses originally scheduled for Malawi. The Dennis Dragon double-deckers, with automatic gearbox, power steering and rear engine with luxury seats, caused considerable interest and excitement following their launch by President Daniel Arap Moi at Jamhuri Showgrounds that year. Ambassador John Peter Mbogwa, a director of Kenya Bus and a former city town clerk, had tried tirelessly to midwife relations between Stagecoach and the Moi government with limited success. Between 1991 and 1992, Stagecoach increased its fleet in Nairobi to 410 buses and in Mombasa to 176. Altogether, the company would invest more than 2 billion Kenya shillings in fleet replacement. And its facilities would grow to include the old Kenya Bus main depot at Eastleigh, another one at Riruta, and the bus station in the center of the city. This was in addition to staff quarters in the Ziwani and Shauri Moyo areas of Nairobi that the City Council had allocated to the company through the franchise agreement of the early 1960s to house its inspectors and crew to enable them to operate efficiently.
They recognized people who were giving service or revenue to the council. We were recognized as movers of the economy by that time. In Ziwani, we decided they should be for inspectors. But in Shauri Moyo, we said they should be for drivers and conductors, to separate them so that they should not mix, because if they mix, the discipline will go down. If they mix, you cannot mix with the people you are supervising. You drink with them, or you eat with them, or you move with them. The discipline will not be there.
In 1995, Stagecoach, as a way of diversification due to competition in the city, even launched a new brand, Stagecoach Express, that began to operate on up-country routes to Kangundo, Nunguni and Meru Maua, and later to Kisumu, Eldoret, Kisii, and indeed all towns in Western Kenya. The following year, Stagecoach Express became the first company to computerize its ticketing system, which allowed advance booking for an unlimited number of days. By 1998, Stagecoach was operating nearly 78 buses in its express service. Due to these investments, Stagecoach was able to increase its route network and retain nearly 50% of Nairobi's public transport market. But all this came against increasing cutthroat competition from matatus. Whereas a year or two after Stagecoach came on the scene, there were 3,500 matatus operating on the city's roads, by 1995, the number had shot up to 6,500. Matatu growth accelerated in 1991 as a result of the World Bank Structural Adjustment Program that retrenched civil servants, devalued the shilling against the dollar, and brought about liberalization of trade. Control on foreign exchange was removed. Those who had been retrenched went in for cheaper second-hand minibuses from Japan, popularly known as Nissans, to enter the matatu business, since there were no rules of entry into the transport business in Kenya. and Stagecoach would be caught up in events not of its own making that impacted negatively on its operations. First, there was the rough economic conditions the country was going through, partly due to corruption. High inflation and interest rates had led to a 35% devaluation of the Kenya shilling that raised the cost of fuel and imported parts needed for the maintenance of the Stagecoach fleet of buses. And local borrowing was possible only at an interest rate of 35%. The economic downturn was affecting everyone, including the city council, which had been left with 5% of the shares in Stagecoach. In 1997, the town clerk, Zipporah Wandera, tried to sell off the company's central bus station, ostensibly to raise money to pay outstanding contributions that the council owed the City Council of Nairobi's Savings and Credit Society. Kenya Bus would take the council to court over the matter, but it would end up in a protracted legal battle that not only cost the company plenty of money in legal fees, but to this day has yet to be determined. And there were the political uncertainties during the Moi era that the country went through as pressures grew upon the Moi government to open up Kenya's democratic space. The first major crisis came on August 1, 1982, when some soldiers in the Kenya Air Force unsuccessfully tried to overthrow Moi. The failed coup would result in serious interruption of public transport all over the country, badly affecting Kenya Bus operations. At one time, the country's buses had to be escorted by armed police to ensure the safety of their passengers. For nearly 2 decades thereafter, the country had been a one-party state till 1992, when the first multi-party general election took place. Pressures would continue to pile up from the Forum for the Restoration of Democracy, Ford Party in Nairobi, and Islamic Party of Kenya, IPK, in Mombasa, on the Moi government for more liberalization. As the country prepared for the next general election, due towards the end of 1997, anti-government demonstrations by politicians, society leaders and university students became the order of the day. And during some of those demonstrations, Kenya Bus and later Stagecoach buses were targeted. Demand on the government to compensate the losses were never realized. Such was the case when in July of 1997, 2 Stagecoach buses were burnt down at Dandora in Nairobi by protesters who had engaged the police in running battles demanding the introduction of more political reforms. 2 days later, clashes broke out at the University of Nairobi as hundreds of students protested a violent government crackdown on opposition leaders seeking constitutional reforms. At the university's Kabete campus, students hijacked and burnt Stagecoach buses. Letters from the company seeking compensation for damaged or burnt buses from government went unanswered. And it was not only political violence that cost Stagecoach dearly. The company would lose a bus the following year in one of the worst road accidents the country had ever experienced, when a Stagecoach Express bus travelling from Meru to Nairobi broke through the sides of a bridge and plunged into the Nithi River, killing 57 people, including 2 drivers, a conductor and an inspector, and injuring scores of others. Kenya Alliance Insurance Company, which by then was Stagecoach's insurer, refused to pay compensation to the victims of the accident, arguing that the vehicle was overloaded. Stagecoach would end up paying nearly 37 million Kenya shillings in compensation. And as if this wasn't enough, several months later, in August 1998, 2 Stagecoach buses were destroyed beyond repair during the bombing of the American embassy in Nairobi by Al-Qaeda terrorists. More than 200 people lost their lives in that incident. All this was taking place even as the company tried to cope with the extensive damage done to the country's road infrastructure by the El Niño rains that fell between 1996 and 1998. Stagecoach Holdings pumped an additional 600 million Kenya shillings into its Kenyan operations to deal with the new challenges. It removed its buses from badly damaged city routes and increased fares on the remaining routes so as to meet the rising vehicle maintenance costs. But the situation remained dire. By mid-1998, the company had been forced to lay off 400 employees due to increasing losses, against the will of a strong Transport and Allied Workers Union, then led by Simon Kigalu as Secretary General. In October that year, Stagecoach Holdings decided to pull out of Kenya. Another multinational had thrown in the towel. It sold its 95% share in its Kenyan bus subsidiaries to a group of local investors that included a holding company, Greyhound Luxury Coach Limited, Karanja Kabage, George Thuo, Agnes Wanjiru Kiraithe, John Peter Mbogwa, Anne Heron Gloag, and City Council of Nairobi. Interestingly, it is the directorship in Greyhound that gave the impression that Kenya Bus was pro-Moi, a perception that was later to hound them after Moi left office in 2002. Some of the other directors in Greyhound were Samuel Gishuru, Hosea Kiplagat, and Stanley Murage. Karanja Kabage, an insurance broker and lawyer by profession, had been in the insurance business for more than 20 years and was Kenya Bus insurance broker through his firm Kabage and Mwirigi Insurance Brokers. George Thuo became the first African managing director of the company. Under the purchase agreement, the new owners reverted to the old name, Kenya Bus Services Limited. They acquired only the movable assets of Stagecoach and operated from the immovable ones such as Eastleigh Garage on payment of a fee. Stagecoach, however, cleared all debts other than contingent liabilities arising out of staff and accidents. Stagecoach operations had been divided into two divisions, an intercity division that consisted of 98 buses covering destinations outside Nairobi, and an intracity one that operated about 300 buses serving the city and its environs. Under a new strategic plan developed by the consulting firm Deloitte, Kenya Bus decided to segment the market by creating a city division called Bustrack Limited, a city premium service called Metro Shuttle Limited, and an intercity premium service called Msafiri Passenger Service that used Isuzu buses on ordinary upcountry routes. For the intercity service, the company managed to enter into a deal with General Motors to supply it with 20 new buses without any advance payment. It replaced all of the old fleet on the intercity routes, and by 2001 it had built up the fleet to nearly 70 vehicles, more than double the number in use before the new consortium of owners took over. The big challenge for the new Kenya Bus owners was how to cut costs so as to compete better in a paratransit operation environment that Kenya had adopted.